I can report to you right now, for the first time, the U.S. Congress is introducing this formal resolution which outlines the path to Donald Trump's impeachment. This is Speaker Pelosi barreling ahead on a full House floor vote this Thursday. And here's what we know. This actually tells us new things. The resolution lays out where the impeachment probe goes over these next few weeks, a crucial period that could lead to the impeachment of Donald Trump and the Senate trial of Donald Trump. Now, Democrats are using this resolution to create the process and to figure out, to decide, to conclude once and for all whether sufficient grounds exist for the House to impeach Donald J. Trump. Now, here's what is key about this news tonight. First, the resolution confirms the Intelligence Committee will keep driving this process, not a select committee, as was used in Watergate. Second, this process will eventually land back at the Judiciary Committee, which, of course, before the Ukraine scandal broke, that was the committee that was probing presidential obstruction outlined in the Mueller report. This resolution also puts it back in the driver's seat before this thing ends. Third, I can tell you the resolution is now the blueprint for taking what has been a confidential investigation of the Ukraine plot into public view. There is a framework now in here for public hearings. Democrats say that will confront the complaints that the process up to date hasn't been transparent. There will also be rules for who can question these witnesses and rules for how the minority, the GOP, can request its witnesses. Today, some of the complaints continued.
I applaud the Speaker for finally admitting it is a whole entire sham, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
It's clear Pelosi needs to declare a mistrial. This has been a tainted process from the start.
Now, this new resolution does something else as well. It provides for security redactions and public release of the deposition of witnesses. Now, so far, as you know, those depositions have been private. So if you watch the news, of course, you know the drill. A key witness will march into the Congress, like diplomat Bill Taylor, and we'll get quotes from a statement, clues to some of the key points discussed. And lately, those alone have been damning to Trump. Or, you know the drill, a Trump loyalist will go into Congress, like this one, Gordon Sondland, and things dribble out. It wasn't actually until days after what you see here, when he was marching into Congress, that his lawyers told the Wall Street Journal he actually confirmed there was a quid pro quo. And it was that same drill, this same damning format for Trump today, with what you see here as Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, a current White House staffer, went through security and marched in to face this committee. His opening statement, incriminating for the White House, he's the first person who was in on Trump's Ukraine call who has now testified. And so as we report on what's coming out of that, keep in mind how today's deposition could shift if the House passes this new resolution, because the public won't be limited to highlights or readouts or someone's interpretation. You'll be able to read the whole deposition or whatever isn't redacted once it's released. And let me tell you, of all the depositions to date, I will be especially interested to read this Army officer's complete answers, because we're just hours out of it tonight, and we already know it was explosive. A Purple Heart recipient wounded in Iraq, corroborating others who've testified this was a quid pro quo bribery plot. His firsthand knowledge reverberating tonight in the Capitol.
You know, Republicans have complained that there wasn't anyone who had firsthand knowledge of the call. He was on that call.
A person who's dedicated his life to the national security of this country.
Firsthand evidence of the betrayal of this president, of his oath of office.
Now, is there an argument that maybe Vindman, however honest, however brave, just misunderstood the intricacies here as he was running around the White House? Was he in over his head? Well, keep in mind, this is the person the Trump administration put as the top Ukraine expert on the Security Council. And today he's telling Congress he was so concerned about what Trump was up to that while he is not the whistleblower, which he states in his statement, he twice reported the plot to White House lawyers. Having listened in on the call, he could see the problem unfolding, and he's telling Congress, I didn't think it was proper to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen, and it was abusive for Trump to ask Ukraine to make a partisan play, undermining security. Now, that's just what we know now. If this new resolution passes, everyone will know a lot more about this deposition and all the depositions. So if you're keeping track of this investigation at home, right along with us, sometimes it might be easy to feel like, quid pro quo, didn't we already know that? Or reported concerns to the lawyers about Ukraine, didn't we know that too? So if you are thinking that, I'm here to tell you, you're right. Investigations involve painstaking, sometimes repetitive corroboration. That's true whether they're done by prosecutors or by Congress. You take each claim or fact and you try to match it with as many witnesses who know about it. Now, the best witnesses are firsthand. So, yes, several people close to the action have said this was a quid pro quo. You've probably heard about that. But let's be clear, Vindland, who testified today, was there. And here's how the Washington Post reports that extra punch of what it means to have him testify today. Now, this is a story that was coming out late today as his testimony emerged. Quote, Vindman is the fifth person to say there was a quid pro quo. But here's why he's different than the others, though. He's the first White House official who was on the July 25th call. By contrast, Ambassador Taylor's most significant allegation is secondhand, relying upon another official telling him Sondland had conveyed that quid pro quo to Ukraine. And Congress is taking at least 4 more depositions from witnesses this week alone. Vindland, as of a couple days ago, was not even billed as the most significant witness. And tonight, he has, in his uniform, shredded one of the few defenses President Trump had left. I want to turn to our power panel to start our coverage tonight. New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg, Emily Bazelon, staff writer for the New York Times Magazine, and Brittany Cooper, a professor at Rutgers. Good evening to each of you.
What's up?
What's up? A lot happened today, I think.
Yeah.
I wonder what you think of the evidentiary significance of this witness.
You know, what's most exasperating to me about this, to your point about the need to have so many witnesses confirm this, is that the theater that the Republican Party engages in as they continue to claim that they're being victimized, that this is a sham trial, that this is just designed to get their guy out. And they're claiming this, that they're powerless to stop all of this from happening and the big bad Democrats are bullies. But the real power lies in the fact that this man, the president, got on TV and admitted that there was a quid pro quo, that he did this. He demanded Ukraine investigate. He demanded China investigate. And we still have to have this much evidence to prove a thing that we all witnessed with our own eyes. That's the testament to the power not only of Republican partisanship, but also of Trump's larger white nationalist project, of his project to take down this democracy, is that we have people who tell us that the truth is that they are the victims of a sham. And in many ways, that is how they feel about it.
So let me see if part of what you're gesturing at is in a healthier civic system, the facts would be established and there would be a debate over what to do about it. And there are arguments against removing a president who has done things that are in the view of many terrible. Sure. But you're saying we're not even there yet because there's just laying out what happened.
I'm literally saying that these people have all the power to determine the narrative, but they are claiming that they are victims. And so this is why we have to engage in this drumbeat with them, and we can't move this process forward.
Well, I guess we are in some ways moving the process forward. I think you're right that the fact that our politics is so polarized is putting pressure on this witness testimony to confirm things. And you're right about this, too, that Trump, you know, in some ways kind of gestured right on television, right in front of us. If you do the crime right on TV, somehow it's not a crime anymore.
That's right.
I do think it's really important to hear from all these witnesses when you have a segment of the public that's so skeptical. And as Ari were saying, this is how investigations work. You have kind of concentric circles. You have people confirm each other. And especially in this situation.
And I'll hand it back to you. But to that point, when Mueller was doing this, although we did follow it, we didn't have nearly the real-time readouts.
Exactly. And it's especially key because the White House is blocking production of all the documents that the Democrats want. So they don't have internal communications. They don't have records of key meetings. And so hearing from people's mouths what happened, that's their way of building a record.
And I think even more than that, you know, what Republicans have been saying up until now, you know, besides these kind of process complaints, is that, well, it's just Trump being Trump, which is, on the one hand, an incredibly damning admission that you can't trust the president not to commit crimes. Right. But the argument was sort of, well, he just made this one phone call and he's sort of verbally incontinent and, you know, he says all sorts of things. Nobody takes him seriously. One of the things that, you know, Fiona Hill and Bill Taylor and now Vindman have confirmed is that this wasn't just one phone call. This was a sustained policy of extortion over many, many months.
Well, and isn't that really damning if you get into whenever it's going to happen, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but if they hold this vote on Thursday and if they ultimately impeach Donald Trump, the Senate is going to have to deal with this. And there may be senators who just want to cover their heads and not his or her heads and not discuss anything. But there may be other senators who say, we got to get into what is acceptable. And there may be a defense that a terrible phone call is not impeachable if all you did was have one terrible phone call, and then afterward, the generals came in and the security advisor came in and said, you can't do that, don't do that, and the president reassessed, right? What you're speaking about is the evidence that this wasn't a bad phone call, this wasn't bad words, this wasn't a mistake, that this was the alleged criminal foreign policy of the United States.
Right, and I think that they're already sort of moving to that defense. They're kind of not he didn't do it, but that it's fine. And it'll be interesting to see if they can sustain that after, a lot of public hearings, after it's kind of very clear to all of their constituents what exactly has happened. I think that probably most of the Republicans will come down on this is fine.
Let me push you on that, for you and the panel. Have they, the Trump defenders in Washington, landed on it's fine? I feel like, and I know this is like the craziest part of covering these days in 2019, but I think that it seemed like the chief of staff came out with a trial balloon of it's fine and then had to walk that back.
I think that's true, but then, if you look at what's happened since then, one of the lines of defense they were trying out this morning was this really frightening and outrageous smear of Vindman that you heard on Fox News and that you heard from some Republicans, that you can't really trust him because his family is from the former Soviet Union, right? Essentially the kind of Judge Curiel smear, that you can't really, that an immigrant who came here when he was 3, necessarily has dual loyalties, which is if the Republican Party is going to get behind that, that is truly terrifying. And I think that they actually had to walk away from that, right? You had Liz Cheney back away from that. You had a lot of pushback. Maybe because they thought that was too indecent even for them, or maybe they just thought that was not a sustainable argument. They're not going to stand behind before the American people and say, don't trust this Army colonel. He's an immigrant. And they've also had to somewhat give up on these process questions because Nancy Pelosi has called their bluff. And then you hear reports from the White House that Trump and Kushner want to debate this on the merits and want that defense to be made on the merits. And so where else are they going to go?
Well, and Emily, there's a difference between impeaching the witness and saying you can't trust him, so what he's saying isn't true, and saying it doesn't matter if what he's saying is true because, to quote Michelle Goldberg and the analysis we've come to rely on, it's fine.
I think that the way in which they still haven't said it's fine is the idea that Trump was withholding military aid, freezing this aid that Congress had authorized for the Ukraine in return for digging up dirt on Joe Biden and his family. That, I think, they have not conceded. That's a really important point. And William Taylor testified to that level of quid pro quo last week. I'm really interested in whether future witnesses get into that terrain as the kind of more serious, potential payback that Trump was asking for.
And that goes to, again, new revelations from Vindman. I'm going to read this to you, Brittany, because this gets into him versus Ambassador Sondland, who's your Trump loyalist, your Trump donor. And he says, look, Sondland emphasized the importance that Ukraine deliver on the quid pro quo, i.e. the investigations of 2016 and Biden's. I stated, this is new today, Ambassador Sondland, that his statements were inappropriate and the request to investigate Biden had nothing to do with national security, and I reported my concerns to the NSC's lead counsel. The other thing that comes through here, which is like the third thing, not the first story, the second, but you've got a lot of people
running to the lawyers,
hitting to the red phone and the lawyers and the warnings, and it still didn't get corrected until it went public.
This is the thing that I'm trying to get at by talking about the mountains of evidence, right? That part of what I know being an African American in this country is that very often when you are a person that doesn't have power, you are yelling about injustices that happen. And people can keep on dismissing those injustices because of their own agenda. And so then you need mountains of evidence to prove that the cops are disproportionately targeting African American men, that, we have a housing crisis in the country, there's a black women's maternal mortality crisis in the country. I'm talking about the levels of evidence it is taking to prove something that we already know. So yes, I believe in process. Yes, I think the process is moving forward. What gives me pause is that you still have the Republicans largely having the power because they control the Senate to not hold this man accountable. So the Democrats will engage in this theater. It is appropriate for them to do so. We will engage in this process. But the fact that we keep on having to reiterate something that we already know gives me real pause. A country that doesn't have a clear understanding and grasp on the truth, despite all of these officials coming forward and saying this is a problem, is an empire that's dead on arrival.
Well, you want to get into it. We're talking, Emily, about burden of proof.
Yeah.
And you're saying that while the rules are supposed to be one standard of burden of proof. The system, as it has operated, has different standards for different people based on power and marginalization.
And let me say one last thing about that. What I'm saying is that Trump is claiming that he is powerless, but the evidence that he is more powerful than he should be is that we are requiring so much evidence in the face of brazen skirting and breaking of laws and using the U.S. government as a shakedown for his own personal interests.
Right, as a shakedown that enlisted members of the military who are generally understanding of the use and projection of American power abroad, including to take lives when deemed necessary or justified, are saying, yes, there is the power to kill, but there isn't the power to do this. The president has gone too far.
That's right.
And as you say, how much evidence does America need? This is a fascinating conversation. I will be bringing Brittany and Michelle back on future shows, so thank you very much. And I'm bringing Emily back for your reporting on Mr. Barr later this hour. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.